In this lesson, I want to talk about floating values. And floats are used in order to set elements and position them either to the left or to the right of different other elements that it's related to. So for instance, if we've got our images here, we see that we've got images scattered throughout our HTML code, and it's just in line with the text. So it's actually not floating with the text, so it's not being pulled over. We've got these huge breaks in the text. So we can really easily fix this by adding a float to it. We can float all of our images over to the right-hand side, and now this is going to present it in a much neater fashion. So we do have some issues here because we've got the images too close together and so on, but essentially now they're floating better in line with the available text. So I can also put maybe a max height of 100 pixels. So that will show you a better example of how those images are floating in line. So maybe if we want to have all of our images float over to the left hand side, we could do that as well. And we can see the way that float handles and better aligns different elements within our web page. So also commonly used within websites when we're developing them is when we come up with our structure for our content. So typically if we've got a website and we've got maybe two different sections, this is where we're going to use float again. So I've actually divided up our website. So I've created a div here that I've called main, and essentially this is going to hold all of this main content, and I want to add in a sidebar that floats to the left, to the right of it. So this is going to be essentially like a two-section type web page. So we can add in floats in here as well. So we can identify it by main, and we can set a width of, so I'm going to set it a width of a percentage width. So maybe we want to set it at 60%, and I want to add in a float here where I want to float it over to the left hand side. So this allows me to add in my sidebar menu, but we see that the footer is being added in there as well. So we don't probably want that to happen either. So let's take a closer look at what's going on here, and I'm going to copy out some of this content here so that I can place it into my sidebar. So I've got a little bit more happening here. So now I've got my sidebar created there, and I want to get rid of some of these as well. So now I've got a sidebar, but I'm not very specific on how I want my sidebar to show up. So let's create a border around here, 1 pixel solid black border, so that we can better identify that main content section. And now let's work on the sidebar. So I'm going to copy this over, and I'm going to type, identify it as sidebar. And we can't have it 60, and 60 is over 100%, and also there's some default border sizing there. So this one should be quite a bit smaller than the other one in order to make it line up next to it, because as we know, whenever we float to the left, if we're taking up 100%, there's not going to be any space for any additional elements. So we want to make sure that we're leaving some space. So 60% and 30% is pretty good spacing. And we see that we've got the footer there showing up as well. And this is where we need to implement clear. So I usually like to set up all of these floats to the left and the right as classes and utilize them. So I would have one class where I would have float right, and then I could just simply call to these classes as needed. I would have another one where I would have a float to the left, and I would also want one that clears it out, so float left. And lastly, I want to do one where maybe I can call it clear, and this is going to be actually different than the float. And essentially what this is going to do is it's going to clear out any of those float properties that might be lingering and that might be interfere with some of our other content that we're creating and adding. So we do have an option to either clear, so we can clear the left, we can clear the right, or we can clear the both. So let's do a clear of both. And then now all I need to go to footer and apply class, and I can just apply class of clear, And now we see that the footer is actually moving back down to where it was originally supposed to be positioned and where it's intended to. So it's not attaching to this sidebar, and the sidebar probably looks better if I float it over to the right, because I've only got a 2 content area section here. So I've got a left and a right hand side, and we can see that even when we're resizing, that really nicely resizes. I can even make this a touch bigger, and it's not going to interfere with any of the other content areas. So whenever we resize, we see that we've got this nice division of our 2 content areas. And you're going to see float again whenever when we style our navigation items. So in order to line them to the left of each other, this is where you're going to see float again. So that's coming up in one of the additional lessons.